The silence of Snow had always made Elias Winter believe that the world was capable of forgiveness. It covered the ugly things first, the broken fences, the dead gardens, the muddy roads, the roofs of houses whose families had long since stopped speaking to one another. It softened sharp edges. It quieted the world. It fell with the patience of something ancient, something that had seen men ruin themselves 1,000 times, and still chose each winter to lay a white hand over the damage. But that night, as Elias drove north through the Norwegian mountains, he did not feel forgiven. He felt followed. The road was narrow, and black beneath his headlights, winding between cliffs of pine and stone. Beyond the glass, snow drifted down in slow, deliberate flakes, not wild enough to be called a storm, not gentle enough to be beautiful. The trees stood on either side of the road like witnesses. Their branches bowed under the weight of winter, and in the pale sweep of his headlights they seemed to lean closer as he passed. On the passenger seat beside him lay his camera bag, a thermos of untouched coffee, and Clara's scarf. It was a simple thing. Cream-colored wool frayed at one end, still carrying the faintest memory of lavender soap if he pressed it too close to his face and allowed himself to believe in ghosts. Elias had tried many times to leave it behind. He had placed it in drawers, boxes beneath folded sweaters once, even in the attic under a sheet of old newspapers. Yet whenever winter returned, so did the scarf. Tonight he had taken it without thinking. Or perhaps he thought he had taken it because he knew exactly where he was going. The cabin belonged to no one anymore. His grandfather had built it before Elias was born, back when men still believed they could survive anything if they had an axe, a fire, and enough silence. It stood alone above the valley, surrounded by miles of forest and snow, a place too far from town for comfort and too close to memory for peace. Elias had not been there in 2 years, not since Clara. He tightened his hands around the steering wheel. Do not say her name, he told himself, but grief had never obeyed him. Clara appeared in pieces, never whole. The curve of her fingers around a coffee cup, the sound of her laugh in another room, the way she used to stand barefoot by the window in winter, wrapped in that cream scarf watching the snow as if it were speaking privately to her. You photograph everything she had once told him, smiling, but you never look long enough. He had laughed then. He had not understood. The car climbed higher. The road disappeared beneath the skin of white. When he finally reached the cabin, the sky had darkened into a deep blue-black, and the world had narrowed to the space touched by his headlights. The cabin waited at the edge of the trees, its roof heavy with snow, its windows dark, its wooden walls silvered by frost. For a moment, Elias did not get out. He sat with the engine running, listening to the heater breathe, staring at the cabin, as if it might reject him. Then, the engine died beneath his hand, and the silence rushed in. It was the kind of silence that did not feel empty. It felt occupied. Elias stepped out into the cold. Snow accepted his boots with a soft crunch. His breath rose white before him. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under its frozen burden. He stood beside the car camera bag, over one shoulder Clara's scarf wrapped once around his neck, and looked up. The northern lights were faint tonight, a green bruise behind the clouds. Not enough for the photograph he had imagined. Not enough to justify the drive, the cabin, the memories, pressing against his ribs. But Elias had not truly come for the lights. Inside the cabin smelled of dust, old wood, and cold ash. He lit the stove with trembling hands, watching the small flame catch grow, and begin to lick at the blackened iron. The room slowly revealed itself. The narrow bed against the wall, the table beneath the window, the old chair where his grandfather used to smoke, the shelves, lined with chipped mugs and rusted tins. Everything was as he remembered. That was the cruelty of places. They waited unchanged while people broke themselves apart. Elias placed his camera on the table. He removed his gloves, flexed his stiff fingers, and poured coffee from the thermos. He did not drink it. He only held the cup because it gave his hands something to do. Outside, the snow thickened. He tried to sleep near midnight, but sleep had become over the years a room he could no longer enter. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. Headlights spinning through falling snow glass, bursting inward. Clara screaming his name. Elias sat up sharply. The stove had burned low. The cabin was blue with moonless winter light. For a few seconds, he did not know what had woken him. Then he heard it. A footstep. Outside. He held his breath. Another. Slow. Pressing. Deliberate. Elias turned toward the window. The glass was rimmed with frost, but beyond it he could see the white clearing the black trees, the pale world under snow. Nothing moved. Then came the sound again. Crunch. Not from the front of the cabin this time. From the side wall. Elias stood. The wooden floor groaned beneath him, and the sound seemed offensively loud. He took the flashlight from his bag and moved to the door. His heart beat with a low, sick rhythm, not fast yet, but heavy. He opened the door. Cold entered like an animal. The beam of his flashlight cut across the porch, the steps, the snow-covered clearing. Nothing. Only the wind moving loose powder along the ground. Elias stepped outside. The snow came to his ankles. He swept the flashlight, left then right. The pines stood close and dark, their trunks vanishing into shadow. He waited listening. No footsteps. No voice. Only the soft, endless descent of snow. He lowered the flashlight, and then he saw the tracks. His own footprints led from the car to the cabin, already softening beneath fresh snow. But beside the cabin wall near the window where he had been sleeping, the snow was smooth, untouched. No prints, no marks, nothing. Elias swallowed. He told himself it had been the roof shifting, ice cracking, a fox in the woods. His mind exhausted and poisoned by memory making a pattern out of winter noise. He went back inside and locked the door. For a long time he stood with his back against it. At dawn the world was white beyond comprehension. The forest had vanished under snow. The car was a rounded shape beneath a thick blanket. The sky hung low, colorless, and heavy. Elias made coffee on the stove and drank it standing by the window. He should leave, he thought. Instead, he took his camera. By late morning, he was walking into the trees. The forest behind the cabin sloped upward toward a ridge from which on clear days one could see the valley opening like a dark wound between the mountains. Elias had photographed it often in his younger years. Before Clara. Before he understood that beauty could survive, even after happiness did not. He moved slowly through the snow, stopping now and then to take pictures. Black branches against white sky, a frozen stream half buried under ice. The delicate architecture of snow gathered on a fallen log. The camera gave him distance. Through the lens, the world became manageable. Grief could be framed, loneliness could be composed, fear could be adjusted for light. After nearly an hour, he reached a clearing he did not remember. It was perfectly round and circled by pines. Snow lay untouched across it, smooth as linen. In the center stood a single birch tree, white bark against white ground, so pale it seemed less grown than carved. Elias lifted his camera. That was when he heard the voice. Hello. The word was small, bright, and terribly near. Elias froze. His finger remained on the shutter button. For several seconds he did not breathe. Then slowly he lowered the camera. A child stood at the far edge of the clearing. She was perhaps 8 years old. Thin, pale, dressed in a white coat that nearly vanished into the snow. Her hair hung dark and wet around her face, though no thaw had touched the forest. She wore no hat, no gloves. Her cheeks were not red from cold. They were the color of candle wax. Elias stared at her, unable to speak. The girl smiled. Not sweetly, not cruelly. Sadly. Are you lost? Elias asked. His voice sounded unfamiliar in the open air. The girl tilted her head. Are you? A coldness moved through him that had nothing to do with winter. He looked behind her, searching for parents, a path, any sign of another human being. There was nothing. No voices. No movement among the trees. More than that, there were no footprints around her. The snow between the trees and the place where she stood was flawless. Elias took a step back. The girl watched him. Who are you? He asked. She did not answer. A gust of wind crossed the clearing, lifting snow from the ground in a pale veil. For one moment the child blurred behind it, and Elias had the absurd thought that when the snow settled, she would be gone. But she remained. Then she spoke. Why did you leave her there? The camera slipped from Elias's hand and struck the snow with a dull sound. Every part of him went still. The forest seemed to lean inward. The branches, the sky, the entire white world listening. What did you say? He whispered. The girl's expression did not change. She waited for you. Elias shook his head once. Then again. No. The word came out broken. The girl lifted one small hand and pointed behind him. Elias did not want to turn. He knew with a certainty deeper than reason that if he looked, Something inside him would open and never close again. But grief is stronger than fear. He turned. Between the trees far back along the path he had made stood a woman. She was almost hidden by falling snow. A pale dress, dark hair, one hand resting against the trunk of a pine. Clara. Elias could not move. The world went silent so completely that he no longer heard the wind, the trees, even his own breathing. There was only the woman in the snow and the unbearable distance between them. Then the figure turned and walked deeper into the forest. Clara Elias shouted. He ran. Branches tore at his coat. Snow dragged at his boots. He stumbled, caught himself, ran harder. The figure appeared between trunks. Disappeared. Appeared again, farther away than she should have been. Elias called her name until his throat burned. At last he broke through the trees and found himself on the path below the cabin. The woman was gone. There was only snow. Elias stood bent over, gasping his hands on his knees. When he looked back, he saw his own frantic trail cutting through the forest. Only his. No child's footprints. No woman's. Only his. He returned to the cabin near dusk, shaking so badly that he could barely fit the key into the lock. But the door was already open. It moved gently in the wind, creaking on its hinges. Inside, the stove had gone out. Snow had blown across the floorboards in a thin white line. Elias stepped in slowly. "Hello," he called. No answer. Then he saw it. Clara's scarf was no longer around his neck. It hung from a nail beside the window, wet with melting snow, though he had not taken it off. Elias stared at it, his mind refusing the shape of what he saw. Behind him the door swung shut. The cabin fell dark. And from the corner of the room in a voice softer than snowfall, a woman whispered, "You promised you wouldn't leave me." The things buried under snow. You promised you wouldn't leave me. Elias did not turn around. For one suspended moment, the cabin became a place outside of time. The stove was dead. The air was blue with cold. Snow hissed softly through the gap beneath the door, and the scarf hanging by the window dripped meltwater onto the floorboards, one slow drop at a time. He knew that voice. He had heard it laughing into his shoulder in summer fields. He had heard it whispering half asleep against his neck. He had heard it break once in the terrible white dark of a car wreck. Clara. His lips moved, but no sound came. Behind him the voice breathed again. Elias. He closed his eyes. "Don't," he whispered. The room answered with silence. When he finally forced himself to turn, there was no one in the corner. Only the old chair, the black stove, the frost-covered window, and the pale scarf hanging like a piece of surrendered skin. Elias staggered to it. His fingers touched the wool. It was wet, not damp from the warmth of his body, not marked by his breath. It was soaked through with snow, as if someone had carried it for hours through the forest before bringing it home. He pulled it down and held it against his chest. "I'm tired," he said aloud, though no one had asked. "That's all this is." But the cabin did not believe him. That night's sleep came in fragments. He dreamed of headlights turning in circles, of Clara's hand reaching through broken glass, of snow falling inside the car. When he woke, he was on the floor beside the bed, his nails dug into the wood, his throat raw from calling her name. The clock on the wall had stopped. 3:17. Elias stared at it. The same time as the accident. For 2 years he had avoided clocks at night. He turned them face down in hotel rooms. He removed the batteries from the one in his apartment. He told people it was because ticking annoyed him, because he liked silence, because insomnia made him strange. He never told them the truth. At 3:17 inches the morning, Clara had still been alive. By dawn, the storm had worsened. Wind pressed against the cabin walls with a low, mournful sound. Snow climbed the windows. The world outside had lost all distance. There were no trees, no sky, no road, only a moving whiteness that seemed to breathe. Elias checked his phone. No signal. He tried the radio on the shelf. Static. He stood in the center of the cabin wearing his coat indoors. Clara's scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. The old rational part of him searched for order. Fatigue. Trauma. Isolation. Hypothermia. A mind starved of sleep and warmth could create anything. A child in the snow. A woman between the trees. A dead wife's voice in an empty room. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps at the door. Elias stopped breathing. Another 3. Not urgent. Not violent. Patient. He took one step back. "Who's there?" the wind answered. Then, from outside, Clara's voice said I waited. His knees nearly failed him. "No," Elias said. "No, you didn't." The latch trembled. He grabbed the chair and wedged it beneath the handle, though a part of him knew how useless that was. If grief wanted to enter a room, no lock could stop it. The knocking ceased. For a while, there was only the storm. Then something scraped slowly along the outer wall, moving from the door toward the window. Elias turned. A shape passed behind the frosted glass. Human. Slow. Too close. He backed away until his shoulders struck the opposite wall. The shape paused outside the window, separated from him by a skin of ice and wood and fear. He could not see the face, only the suggestion of hair, the pale outline of a woman standing in the storm. Then one hand touched the glass. 5 fingers appeared in the frost. Elias covered his mouth. On Clara's left hand, where the ring should have been, there was only darkness. The memory opened, not gently, not like a door, like ice splitting under weight. 2 years earlier, the road had been worse than any forecast predicted. Clara had wanted to turn back at the last village, but Elias had laughed it off with that quiet arrogance grief later taught him to hate. "We're almost there," he had said. She had looked at him from the passenger seat, the scarf around her neck, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "You always say that when we're not." He had smiled. Then the deer appeared. Or perhaps there had been no deer. Sometimes he remembered antlers in the headlights. Sometimes only a shadow. Sometimes he remembered nothing at all between Clara saying his name and the car leaving the road. The impact had folded the world. Metal screamed. Glass became rain. Snow burst through the windshield like a second sky. When Elias opened his eyes, the car was tilted against a tree, nose down in a ditch, the engine ticking, the headlights buried in snow. Clara was still beside him. Her breathing was shallow. "Elias," she whispered. "I'm here." My leg. He had tried to move. Pain tore through his shoulder. Blood ran warm down his temple. The doors were crushed. The windows shattered. Somewhere beneath the dashboard, something sparked. "I'll get help," he said. Clara turned her face toward him. No, it was not a refusal. It was fear. "Stay with me." He remembered touching her cheek. He remembered promising, "I'll come back." Then he crawled through the broken window and into the snow. At first, he had meant it. Every step away from the wreck was supposed to be temporary. Every breath was for her. He would find the road, find a signal, find help. But the storm swallowed the car behind him. Then it swallowed his footprints. Then, somewhere in the white dark, Elias became afraid not for Clara, but for himself. That was the part he never spoke aloud. He walked faster. Then he ran. When the rescue team found him near dawn, he was half conscious beside the road frost in his eyelashes. Clara's scarf wrapped around his bleeding hand. By the time they reached the car, she was gone. No body, no trail, only blood on the passenger seat and one bare handprint on the inside of the windshield. The official report used gentle words: disorientation, exposure, possible animal interference, body not recovered. But Elias knew better. He had left her, and the snow had remembered. The sound of breaking glass snapped him back into the cabin. The window had cracked. A thin line ran from top to bottom through the frost. Outside, the figure was gone. Elias stood trembling until daylight dimmed again into afternoon. He did not eat. He did not drink. He sat at the table with Clara's scarf in his lap and stared at his camera. Near sunset, he noticed the photographs. He had not turned the camera on since returning from the clearing. Yet the screen glowed faintly. One image showed the birch tree. Another showed the child at the edge of the clearing. Elias leaned closer. His blood went cold. The child was not looking at him in the photograph. She was looking behind him. He pressed forward to the next image. Clara stood among the trees, blurred by snow. But there, her face was pale, almost unfinished, as if the world had not fully decided to let her exist. One hand was raised slightly toward him. Around her neck was no scarf. Elias's breath shook. He clicked again. The final photograph had not been taken in the forest. It was inside the cabin. The angle was from the corner of the room. It showed Elias asleep on the bed, and Clara standing beside him, bending close to his ear. He dropped the camera. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. No, he said again, but the word had lost all strength. Outside, the storm fell quieter. That frightened him more. By evening, the snow had stopped completely. The sudden silence was unbearable. Elias opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The world lay still beneath a bruised gray sky. At first, he saw only the thick snow around the cabin. Then his eyes adjusted. There were footprints. A single line of them led from the edge of the forest to the porch. Small, bare. A child's footprints. They stopped at the bottom step. Elias followed them with his eyes back toward the trees. At the forest edge stood the little girl in the white coat. She was holding something in both hands. Elias descended the steps. The girl did not move. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Her dark eyes lifted to his. "She wants you to remember the part you buried." "I remember enough." "No," the girl said. "You remember the part where you suffered." Snow drifted from a branch. "You forgot the part where she did." Elias flinched as if struck. The girl opened her hands. In her palms lay Clara's wedding ring. It was dark with old blood. Elias stared at it. His throat closed. "Where did you get that?" The girl turned and looked into the forest. "Where you left her." Then she began walking away. Her bare feet made no sound. Elias stood frozen for several seconds, every instinct begging him not to follow. But the ring in his hand was real. Cold. Heavy. Impossible. "Wait," he called. The girl continued into the trees. Elias followed. The forest received him like a mouth. The light failed quickly beneath the pines. Snow muffled everything except his breathing and the distant whisper of the girl's coat moving ahead of him. Sometimes she disappeared behind the trunks. Sometimes she seemed too far away. Sometimes too near. Then the trees opened, and Elias saw the road. Not the road as it was now buried and silent. The road as it had been 2 years ago. Headlights burning sideways in the ditch. Snow falling hard. Steam rising from the crushed hood. The car wrapped around the black trunk of a pine. Elias staggered. No. Inside the wreck, Clara turned her head. Her face was cut. Her lips were blue. One hand pressed against the glass. She saw him. Not the Elias from the past. Him. The man standing in the snow now. "Elias," she whispered. He fell to his knees. "I came back," he sobbed. Clara's eyes filled with an old bottomless sorrow. "No," she said. The windshield fogged beneath her final breath. "You came back. Too late." The vision vanished. The forest returned. Dark. Still. Empty. Elias remained on his knees in the snow. The wedding ring clenched so tightly in his fist that it cut his palm. Ahead of him, deeper among the trees, Clara stood in her pale dress snow, caught in her dark hair. For the first time, she did not vanish. She looked at him with the tenderness of someone who had loved him once, and the grief of someone who had died waiting. Then she spoke. "Come back where you left me. The last footprint. Come back where you left me." Clara's voice did not echo through the forest. It remained close, intimate, unbearable, as if she were standing beside Elias rather than several yards ahead of him beneath the black pines. Snow drifted through her dark hair. Her pale dress stirred in a wind he could not feel. She looked neither alive nor dead, but like something the world had failed to finish mourning. Elias remained on his knees, Clara's wedding ring cutting into his palm. For 2 years he had prayed for this moment and feared it with the same breath. He had imagined seeing her again in hospital corridors in the reflection of train windows and the pale face of every woman who passed him too quickly on winter streets. He had imagined apologies, explanations, the impossible mercy of being understood. But now that Clara stood before him, there was nothing left inside him, except the truth. "I was afraid," he whispered. The confession seemed too small for the forest. Clara's eyes did not harden. That was worse. Anger would have been easier. Hatred would have given him something to stand against. But she only looked at him with a sorrow so gentle it made him want to crawl into the snow and disappear. "I know," she said. Elias bowed his head. "I heard you calling me. I knew you were still alive. I told myself I was going for help, but somewhere out there," his voice broke. "Somewhere in the storm I stopped thinking about you. I only wanted to live." The trees stood silent around them. The little girl waited near Clara's side, her white coat almost invisible in the falling snow. She looked at Elias without judgment, which frightened him more than accusation. Clara turned slowly and began walking deeper into the woods. Elias rose. Every part of him wanted to run the other way. Back to the cabin. Back to the car. Back to whatever remained of the life he had built from denial and locked rooms. But the ring in his hand was real. The scarf around his neck was real. The wound in his soul had been real, long before the dead came to name it. So he followed. The forest changed as they moved. At first it was only the familiar winter dark pine trunks, snowbanks, branches bent low beneath ice. But gradually the spaces between the trees filled with fragments of another night. The air smelled of gasoline. A headlight flickered somewhere to his left, though no car was there. The wind carried the broken chime of glass. Once Elias saw Clara's red glove lying half buried in the snow, then blinked and found only a dead leaf. He walked on. The little girl led the way now, small bare feet leaving no prints. Clara moved ahead like a memory he could not catch. Elias stumbled after them, his boots sinking deeper with every step. The cold entered through his coat, through his skin, into his bones, yet he did not stop. At last they reached a hollow between the trees. Elias knew it before he saw the car. His body remembered before his mind did. His breath shortened. His hands began to shake. The slope, the leaning pine, the ditch where the snow gathered in a crescent. 2 years had passed, yet the place had kept its shape as if the forest had been waiting for him to return and finish what he had begun. The wreck was still there. Half buried beneath snow and ice, the old car rested nose down against the tree. The metal had blackened with age. The windshield was broken inward. One headlight socket gaped like an empty eye. Elias took a step toward it, then another. The passenger door was crushed shut. He remembered pulling at it until his fingers bled. Or had he memory, twisted under grief? Had he truly tried hard enough? Had he tried at all after the first failed attempt? The thought nearly brought him down. Clara stood beside the car, looking not at him but at the passenger seat. She was still warm when you left, the little girl said. Elias turned sharply. The child's face was calm. Who are you? For the first time the girl smiled faintly. I was what she hoped for. Elias did not understand at first. Then he saw Clara's hand move to her stomach. The world fell away. No, he breathed. Clara closed her eyes. You didn't know. Elias stepped back, as if struck. A sound escaped him, low and animal. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. He looked from Clara to the child, from the child to the wreck, and suddenly the little girl's age, her sorrow, her impossible presence became clear, in a way that destroyed him. A daughter, a life that had never reached spring. Clara watched him break. I was going to tell you at the cabin, she said softly. That night, Elias covered his mouth with both hands. Snow fell between them. Patient, merciless. I'm sorry, he said. The words were useless. He knew it even as he said them. Sorry could not warm a frozen body. Sorry could not crawl back through broken glass. Sorry could not hold a frightened woman's hand in the dark and say, I am here, I will not leave you. He approached the car and fell against it, pressing his forehead to the frozen roof. I'm sorry, he said again. I'm so sorry. For a long while no one answered. Then Clara said, Open it. Elias lifted his head. The passenger door crushed, and rusted waited beneath a crust of ice. I can't. You can now. He did not know what she meant, but he placed his hands on the door and pulled. At first nothing moved. His injured shoulder burned, as if the accident had happened minutes ago. He pulled again harder, crying out. Ice cracked along the frame. Metal groaned. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The door tore open. Inside the car was filled with snow. Not entirely. There, beneath the white, something dark lay curled against the passenger seat. Elias reached in with shaking hands. He brushed away snow. A piece of cream-colored wool appeared first. The scarf. Not the one around his neck. Another piece of it, torn and frozen, wrapped around what remained of Clara's hand. Elias stopped breathing. Bone showed beneath the ruined fabric. A ring mark circled one finger where the wedding band had been torn away by time animals or some grief he could not name. He did not recoil. He took her hand, and as his fingers closed around the frozen remains, the forest vanished. He was back inside the car. The storm screamed outside. Blood warmed his face. Clara lay beside him, trapped beneath the dashboard, her eyes wide with pain and terror. Elias, she whispered. This time he did not leave. He crawled toward her through broken glass. He took her face in both hands. He felt the heat leaving her skin. He heard something burning beneath the hood. He heard himself sobbing. "I'm here," he said. "I'm here." "You have to go," Clara whispered. "No, you'll die. Then I'll die here." Her eyes filled with tears. "You came back." Elias pressed his forehead to hers. "I should never have gone." Outside the windshield, the little girl stood in the snow watching them with solemn eyes. Clara smiled faintly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was something older and sadder. Release. The vision broke. Elias was again in the hollow, kneeling beside the open car, Clara's bones beneath his hands. Dawn had begun to pale the sky. The storm was ending. Clara stood before him. The little girl held her hand. For the first time, they both cast shadows on the snow. Elias looked up at them through tears. "Can you forgive me?" Clara's expression trembled. "I loved you," she said. It was not the answer he wanted. It was the answer he deserved. She stepped closer and touched the scarf around his neck. Her fingers were colder than winter, yet gentle. "You have carried the wrong thing, Elias. Not love. Punishment. I don't know how to put it down." Clara looked toward the rising light beyond the trees. "Then walk with us. Until you can." The little girl extended her hand. Elias looked at it. Small. Pale. Impossible. Behind him, somewhere far away, the cabin waited. His car waited. The world waited with its police reports, its unanswered questions, its empty apartment, its clocks, stopped at 317. He could still turn back. He knew that. But the thought no longer felt like survival. It felt like another kind of leaving. He took the child's hand. The cold disappeared. Together, the three of them walked out of the hollow and into the whitening forest. Elias did not know whether they moved through snow or memory. The trees thinned. The sky brightened. Clara walked on his left, the child on his right, and for the first time in 2 years, Elias did not feel followed. He felt accompanied. By mid-morning, the search party reached the cabin. The ranger who found it first noticed the open door, the dead stove, the line of snow across the floorboards. On the table lay a camera, its battery nearly drained. Beside it rested a woman's wedding ring, dark with old blood, and a cream-colored scarf folded with almost ceremonial care. There was no sign of Elias Winter. Outside, the rescuers spread into the trees. They found his footprints easily, one trail leading from the cabin into the forest. Deep, uneven, urgent. They followed it for nearly an hour through the pines, until it reached a hollow beside an old wrecked car, half buried beneath snow. Inside the car, they found what the first investigation never had: a woman's remains, curled in the passenger seat, one hand reaching toward the broken window. The men went quiet then. Even those who had seen death before lowered their voices. But Elias was not there. A younger ranger circled the hollow, frowning at the snow. "That's strange," he said. The older man looked over. "What?" The ranger pointed. The footprints led to the car. They moved around it. They knelt beside the passenger door, and then they continued beyond the hollow toward the ridge. Only one set. No smaller prints, no woman's tracks. Only Elias's. The older ranger followed them to the edge of the trees, where the forest opened toward a vast white slope. The sky above it had cleared, and weak sunlight spilled over the snow, turning the world almost golden. There the footprints began to fade. Not because of wind, not because of fresh snow. They simply grew lighter, step by step, as if the man who made them had become less certain of his own weight. At the top of the ridge, the final print marked the snow. Beyond it, there was nothing. No fall, no body, no return. The ranger stood for a long time in the cold, staring at the untouched white beyond the last footprint. Then, from somewhere far across the valley, he thought he heard a woman laughing. Softly, tenderly, like spring remembering the dead. He told no one. That evening, when the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars came out over the Norwegian forest, snow began to fall again. It covered the wreck. It covered the hollow. It covered the path from the cabin. And by morning, there was no evidence that Elias Winter had ever walked into the woods at all. Only the scarf remained inside the cabin. Dry now, warm to the touch, and faintly scented with lavender.